I think I'd give him the accolade.
Now, late in your career and thereafter, the entry of new cricketing nations to the Test arena provided a busier and much more demanding first-class schedule.
Yes, and I think it's been a little bit unfortunate that although the actual influx of the additional countries hasn't mattered so much, I think the thing that changed the game was the World Series cricket, when there was a preponderance of limited over matches. Now, personally, I don't like limited over cricket. I think it's a waste, but it has had a tremendous impact on the game. It's drawn a tremendous number of people who hadn't previously followed cricket, so it's been a great thing for cricket. Now, I'm saying it's a great thing for cricket even though I don't like it. But it has pushed test matches a little bit into the background, even though the players still prefer test matches. And it's also made for too much cricket. And this has led, of course, to a decline in the Sheffield Shield standard. As I've said earlier, that there are players are not playing against top-class cricketers in Shield matches because the top-class cricketers are engaged in the limited over games or the test matches.
So you have a high regard for the importance of Sheffield Shield in developing international talent?
I think it's vital from an Australian point of view, and I rather feel that since the Sheffield Shield has gone into decline, so too has our cricket.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. The old blood matches between Victoria and New South Wales.
Oh, they were really something. They were really blood matches, I can assure you. But they were played in a magnificent spirit. Out on the field, you could have said we were the most bitter enemies possible. And we were, there's no question about it. My God, the bumpers that Linville and Miller used to throw at us were just incredible. And you'd go off the field, and then you get stuck into a few grogs together. Laugh about it. I remember one occasion when New South Wales gave us a particularly hectic time. I was batting with Lindsay, and there was a couple of drops of rain. Lindsay turned to Arthur Morris, who was very embarrassed about what was going on. A very nice cave, Arthur. Said, "Oh, it's too wet, isn't it, Arthur?" Before he had a chance to answer, Lindsay and I were running off the field, and Linville was calling us back. "Come on, it stopped raining, it stopped." Anyhow, after the match, we went in and feelings weren't too good, I can tell you. And Lindsay sent a note to Arthur, "Well, you've been turning it on against us all day, Arthur. What about turning on a few now?" So Arthur said, "Yeah, come across." So we went across and we had a few grogs. It was all forgotten until the next morning. But the next morning it was on again.
On again. Ian, I wonder, would you dwell for a moment on the significant social changes which have occurred through your time in cricket and at the MCC?
Well, what do you mean by social changes, actually, Tony? In cricket, I don't think the players get as much enjoyment out of the game. I think that they're tied up too much with it, they're living with it too much, they're playing too much. There's too much money in it, I think, now, too. But it has to be because the players are so full-time. And I don't think there's the same relaxed atmosphere about it. Now, when I talk about a relaxed atmosphere, that can always be dangerous. I'm sure they don't play it any harder than we did. In fact, I doubt if they play it quite as hard as we did in our day. But I don't think also that they can relax as much when they come off the field. I think they're just tired of it. And that's the impression I get, that we didn't play enough cricket to tire of it. We were still enthusiastic about it all the time. But I think today, with the surfeit of cricket that they have, that it's just another job to them.
Well, the changes have been several and varied. Will the game survive?
I think it'll survive. It will change, because it has changed. It has changed with the introduction of the limited over cricket. And I envisage that the day could come, when a test match will be something like a baseball game. It'll be 5 days comprising 5 limited over games, the best of 5 limited over games. That could easily be the case because the public has taken to this limited over cricket. And that's always a possibility. Cricket will survive, but it may not survive quite in the form that we've been accustomed to in years past. There's a bit of a transition now with the preponderance of limited over games.
If your forecast turns out to be right, then a lot of people would be disappointed, would they not? Because there's a huge body of opinion out there that feels that that just isn't cricket.
Well, I think that's right, but then of course there are probably fewer people now who think it isn't cricket than was the case 10 years ago. And I think that you've got a changing of attitudes, a changing of time, and I think it's the older people who prefer the more traditional cricket. The younger people now want more activity, more action, and cricket is giving it by this limited over game.
Now, I'd like to go back to 1956. It was a huge year. The Olympic Games were here. You were captain of the team in England. Talk about the Olympics and your experience.
It was a wonderful experience, the Olympics. I just arrived back from England, actually, and I did a bit of the radio commentary, but primarily the television commentary for GTV. And one of the most moving experiences I had was when John Landy was running the 1500 metres. Jack Kramer was up with us. And as they came round the last bend, Jack, in a most emotional way, was calling, "Go, John, go, John, go, John." And he was really engrossed in barracking for John Landy. John didn't win it, of course, but Jack was bitterly disappointed. That was a high moment, I think, too. When we'd done it for about, the commentaries for about 10 days, and I'd been to doing the boxing and the swimming and the whole blasted lot. The final day came along, and I'm quite sure we all felt it would be a complete anticlimax. But if anything, it turned out the best day of the whole jolly lot. It was tremendously moving, and we all had lumps in our throat, tears in our eyes, and the whole blasted lot. And what we thought was going to be an anticlimax really was a climax.
Stimulating time for Melbourne in particular and Australia in general. But how did you get involved in the TV sportscasting side of it?
Well, I'd been writing for the Argus under Colin Bednall when he was editor-in-chief there. He went to GTV9, and Norm Spencer picked me up in England and suggested I might like to do some stuff when I came back. Well, I was thinking about giving up cricket, and I'd been doing broadcasting, I'd been doing writing, and I thought, well, I'll give television a go. It's a new media. Give it a go. And when I came back, he'd obviously spoken to Colin. Colin approached me, and so I settled into it.
They were exciting times. 1956 was the start of television here. Did you enjoy it all?
I found it exhilarating. It was rather interesting, actually. I still remember going out to GTV in that great big room they had, which was the Heinz factory. There were no compartments there at all. There were a couple of dressing rooms, but then there was just this great big barren room. And they had a couple of backdrops, and you used to sit in front of the backdrops. There was no lighting as such. There might have been one spot. No makeup. Oh, nothing at all. And I remember after a while we were talking, we decided we'd do some of our own makeup. So I thought I'll go into Myers and buy some. I suddenly thought, my God, what am I doing here? So I got my wife to come in with me and got her to order the whole lot of it. And we used to put our own makeup, but oh, they were terribly exciting times, really. And Colin Bednall, of course, wanted me to take on a senior executive position with GTV. But I said, no, I don't like to look at this stuff. It was a bit cutthroat then. And I'm glad I didn't, because I remember one time we were doing a simulcast with 3UZ for, I think it was a Red Cross appeal. And we all served our time in acknowledging the donations. And at that time, they were just talking about in Melbourne Tonight. Colin had told me about it in confidence. And they had intended Cliff Nichols to do it. But Cliff unfortunately died, and they threw the program back for a bit. They didn't know who they were going to get. And Graham Kennedy came on from 3UZ, and he did some acknowledgements. I was sitting with Norm Spencer in the control box. And Graham, oh, here's 5 shillings from Mrs. Smith. Thank you very much, Mrs. Smith. Here's 10 shillings from Mrs. Jones. Oh, Mrs. Jones says how wonderful Graham is on television. And about every second thing he was rapping himself, and I thought, oh my God. And Norm said, there's the man for Melbourne Tonight. Oh, I said, you've got to be joking, Norm. And we had quite an argument about it, but Norm was adamant, and of course, he was proved to be so very right. And I'll tell you what, that was a good reason for my not wanting to stay in television. I'm a terrible judge.
Right out of the blue, an opportunity came to apply for the job as Secretary of the MCC. Now, were you self-motivated in that, or did somebody direct you there?
It was rather funny, actually. Bert Chadwick, about 12 or 15 months previously, had asked me to lunch at the Naval and Military Club, and he'd spoken about it. He said Bernie Rownsford was going to retire, and asked what I thought about it, and I was a bit non-committal. And then I promptly forgot about it. The advertisement came in the paper, and it was really by a stroke of chance that I applied, because we were doing the telecast of the Melbourne match that particular day. I was in bed with the flu, and I remember I thought, oh, I'll put in an applications closed on the Saturday. I thought, oh, I'll put in an application while I'm in bed. I didn't have any paper, so I got an old bit of paper. I scribbled out, oh, it wasn't a very good application, I'm sure. And I put it in, I gave it to Bert down in the dressing room, and he put it in, I got interviewed, and I got the job. Now, if we hadn't been broadcasting or telecasting Melbourne match that day, I probably wouldn't have bothered about it. So that, but Bert had spoken to me previously, and I suddenly thought, on the spur of a moment, I decided to put in for it.
Now, you took over as secretary of the MCC from another former international cricketer in Vernon Ransford.
Yes, Bernie was second in line. I think that Huey Trumbull was secretary for a long time before him, and then, of course, there was Wardle before that, but Ben Wardle. But Bernie was a lovely character. I used to see him a lot down in the dressing room before the match. He was a very gentle person and a really delightful character, and obviously a very, very fine cricketer.
And what was the scene here when you took over in July 1957?
Well, the ground wasn't as big as it is now. When I say wasn't as big, it didn't have the accommodation. There was a Grey Smith stand instead of the Western stand, and it was a slightly smaller club. I think it was a more intimate club, even though the administration and that were remote from the club. But it evolved more, I think, around the various sections, and there were 8 or 9 sections at the time, like cricket, football, baseball, lacrosse, and tennis. And I think that there was a lot of club spirit through the sections then. It wasn't quite as remote as it became later.
Well, the sections embraced 13,000 members. There were 26,000 on the waiting list, and the sub was 7 guineas, or $14.70.
Something like that, yes. Yes, well, that was fair enough. The increase in the membership had only come about, I didn't think it was 13,000. I think it was about 9,000, actually. It went up at the time of the Olympic Games. Prior to the Games, it had only been 6,500, I think it was. And I'm not sure of my figures there, but they were something like that. And then they increased the membership when the Olympic Games came about to help pay for the stands. And the club gradually grew away from being so intimate, although when I came here we introduced luncheons and that type of thing and tried to make it more of a club atmosphere. But I do rather feel that the old intimacy was lost to an extent. Nonetheless,
you were quickly to become involved in some spectacular events here, and one I recall, the 1958 home and away match, Melbourne-Collingwood, 99,000.
99,000, yeah, my golly, that was a tremendous crowd. But it was handled quite well, of course. I had 2 magnificent lieutenants in Albert Cuttress and Murray Gibb, and I must give them the full credit for handling those early days. They were really superb. And mind you, one of the biggest moments we had there, I took over on the 1st of July, and that was when the trustees and the club and the VFL were negotiating a new agreement. And you recall in '56, I was in England, but I recall that there were people on the ground on the roof of the southern stand, and well, that was so brittle that people could easily have been killed. And so it was suggested reserved seats should be made available. And I'll never forget, in the July, the trustees said, could you arrange for reserved seats for this year's final series? Being completely naive about the whole thing, I said, yes, we can do it. If we want to do it, we can do it. And I committed the club. Well, of course, we had to get the whole thing done in about 3 or 4 weeks. It was really a tremendous task. And then the old chappie in Ulster Bay, Huey Campbell, helped tremendously. Everyone got into it, and we did in fact get the reserve seats ready, and we made a tremendous change to the ground, although they weren't individual reserve seats on that first occasion, they were block bookings. That was the most rash thing I've ever done in my life, I think, is to say we'd take that on, but we got away with it.
To this date, the largest MCG audience, as you know, was drawn by the American evangelist Billy Graham in 1959, 130,000.
That's right, yes, that was a wonderful day. I met Billy. He was a very fine character, actually. Not quite like the backers that are around the place these days. But yes, we got 130,000 in, and of course people have said to me, how did you get that many people into the ground? Well, the fact is, of course, they were on the oval, and they were everywhere, and there were thousands and thousands on the oval itself surrounding him. In fact, there were probably 30, 40,000 on the oval.
How did you squeeze them in, and with what problems?
Well, it was it was an open ground, and all the gates were open, exit gates and everything, and people were able to wander in. And as I say, the fact that they could go onto the ground, and as well as the 100,000 odd accommodation we had in the stands, there was also 20 or 30,000 of them on the oval.
Now in 1961, world record for a test match, the West Indies, 91,000 odd.
Yes, that was a great day. That was a wonderful day. We had expected a big crowd. We catered for a big crowd. We didn't expect 91,000, quite obviously, but everything went quite smoothly. There were a few delays, but nothing to speak of. The food ran a little bit short, but generally speaking, it was a most successful day. And that tour and that series, of course, was such an outstandingly fine series that people, they'd have been happy with anything, and they went away as happy as sandboys.
1965, the move by Richmond to adopt the MCG as its home ground.
Yes, that was a momentous occasion. Richmond were inspired by the move, I believe, because there was talk that Punt Road was going to be widened and it would take away a large section of their outer ground on that side. And I think the person who really thought of the idea was Pat Kennelly, old Senator Pat Kennelly, who was a trustee, a great Richmond supporter. He'd been chairman of selectors over there, a wonderful supporter, and he mentioned it to Ray Dunn, who was then the president. Richmond approached us. I put it to the committee, and they said, I'll have a talk with them. I thought Bert Chadwick would probably want to take over and do the negotiations, but I think he was probably a bit frightened of Ray. I know that I was. And anyhow, I negotiated with Ray, and I had quite a bit of trepidation about it because Ray was a brilliant person, a brilliant lawyer, and I thought he'll kill me if it did. But we had about an hour, 2-hour talk. They wanted to come here, and we were keen to have them, and everything worked out so smoothly and so easily. There was no hassle. I went and put the proposition back to the committee. They accepted the proposition. Richmond accepted it, and in all the time I was here, we didn't have any written agreement at all. It was purely a handshake, and we got on wonderfully well with them. It was a great move.
Never knew that. How important was the move to the VFL and to the MCC?
Well, it was important both ways because it meant the ground was being occupied more. We were getting a bigger return. It was also a big thing for the VFL because there were bigger attendances came. And Richmond had some fantastic attendances in those early years. When they were here, and they were averaging just about 50,000 a week, which is a colossal average. It was, I believe, a great thing for football, a great thing for Richmond, and a great thing for the MCC.
Norm Smith, the great Melbourne Football Club coach, was always on about the rationalisation of grounds.
Yes, well, I didn't entirely agree with Norm. I believe that there was a great opportunity for Richmond to come to Melbourne. There would have been a great opportunity when St Kilda was at St Kilda for South Melbourne and to go to St Kilda. I've never really been a great one for the effectiveness of teams. See, Hawthorn have never been a success at Carlton. I'm talking about crowd-wise. They've got facilities where they can get their sponsorships. Fitzroy hasn't worked out very well at Collingwood or at Carlton with attendances. And I think people lose their identity, and then the club attitude, club atmosphere goes. But of course, the point is that in today's football, you've got to rationalise grounds. It's absolutely necessary because of the expense of maintaining grounds. And you have to get the most out of them. And of course, the club atmosphere is going from football anyhow. And consequently, it doesn't matter quite so much.
Am I right in saying that when you took over as secretary in '57, the office was in Collins Street?
That's right, yes, in the CML buildings. And then, just as I took over, actually, the club had purchased a property in Jollimont Terrace. And we moved out there 6, 8 months after I took over. And then, of course, when we built the Western Stand, we moved into the ground. And I was a keen advocate. Some of the committee weren't very keen about moving into the ground because they felt that it was trustees or Crown land and we'd be better off having our own property outside. But I was very keen on it because I felt that the club was getting so big that you had to have some immediate contact with the ground. I don't know quite how they... Of course, there was a much leisurely attitude in those early days, and it probably wasn't quite so necessary to have close contact with the ground.
The old Western stand, as earlier mentioned, replaced the handsome old Grey Smith or ladies' stand, and that was in your 10th year in office.
Yes, that was probably right, yes, and that, of course, was a major development. It came about soon after the League had purchased Waverley. Ken Luke warned us not to go ahead with it because the VFL would be going out to Waverley. But we ignored that advice and we did go ahead with it because we felt it was a necessary addition to the ground at that particular stage.
The records show that something like 51,000 people at the time of the Western stand were waiting to get in here, were in a queue for membership. Surely that's unparalleled in sporting history.
I think it probably is, and I think that can be a very good thing. It can also be an embarrassing thing, and it can be a very expensive thing. Keeping a waiting list, changing addresses and all that type of thing. And what we used to do, of course, when the waiting list was a bit smaller, if we advised someone they'd been elected, and it's always by ballot election, 1 in 4 black balls disqualify, etc. And if we couldn't get them because they changed their address, as often happened, and hadn't notified us, we'd contact the proposer and then the seconder to see if we could trace the people. We went to a lot of trouble, but of course that became impractical as the waiting list got longer, and the proposers and nominators had very often died before a person was elected.
Why do you believe so many people wanted to join the MCC and still want to?
I think in the early days there was probably an aura about the club and also about the ground. I think in later years they thought about joining the Melbourne Cricket ground. They thought of that, but as they joined the ground they became absorbed by the club. And I think they developed a liking for the club, as evidenced when Melbourne got into the football finals this year. Their support from the members increased tremendously. But I think that it's largely because they want to be members of the Melbourne Cricket ground and have the facility to come and watch cricket and football here. And as I say, when they're here for a while, they become a little bit absorbed by the club.
So predominantly the MCC members are MCG members?
I think that's probably a fair comment, yes, but both of them are synonymous.
A justifiable move to impose a waiting list levy?
Yes, I think so. I remember when we first brought that in, it was somewhere in the 60s, early 60s, and it was introduced as a nomination fee and as a entrance fee paid in advance. The committee didn't want the idea of a nomination fee, but later that was changed and it was a straight nomination fee. And of course it is, as I say, necessary because the expense of keeping a waiting list of 50, 60,000 people is quite considerable, because you think of the number of address changes that you're advised of, apart from the ones you're not advised of, and having to change all of them, it's quite a job.
Something of a hiatus, a furor occurred about the changing character of the MCG wicket. Did it really change, and do you think it was a good move that was undertaken?
Well, I think it changed after the war, yes, and it was only in my later years that I learned from Don Bradman a reason for that change, and I searched it out after that, and that was that we had about 3 feet of black soil on the wicket here. Merry Creek soil. And we often wondered why we couldn't get the cooch to grow when they had such good cooch wickets before the war. Well, it turns out that before the war, according to Don, and as I say, I've checked it, the wickets were primarily made of water cooch. Well, of course, that's a paspalum, really, and that thrives on soggy weather. And the paspalum was all got rid of after the war, and I believe that Bill Vantoff, when he was curator, he wanted to sort of have a ground for winter and grow ryegrass. But we could not get the cooch to take consistently. We could periods that might last for a year or 2 years, but it wouldn't because the ground was too soggy underneath. And finally, we got Don McIntyre, a soil expert, to check it, and he found that what was happening was that the roots were going down about an inch, the couch roots were going down about an inch, and then they were going sideways, and therefore you got a crust on top of the wicket, which broke away. See, normally couch roots go deep, down 6, 12 inches even, when they go searching for water. But the ground underneath was saturated, and consequently there was no incentive for the couch roots to go down. They just went sideways, and therefore the wicket was bad. Then what we did in the first instance was give it a rotary hoeing, and we were a little bit unlucky there. We rotary hoed the thing to turn it all over, and when we were top dressing, early in the next season, I forget which season it was, 81 or somewhere, the rains came. We had record rains for about 6 weeks, and it meant that we didn't get our levels right in the centre. And of course that's when the criticism really went. I remember saying to the President, Bernard Callan, at the time, I said, well, I'll tell you what, we've just got to sweat this year out because we're going to cop the lot. And we tried to protect, to defend it, but it was uneven, and it was for a couple of years until then we decided that we dig the whole darn thing up and put only about, 6 to 9 inches of black soil on top of a very well drained bed, and that should give the couch an opportunity of really growing. But as I said at the time we did it, which was my last year, that it'll take 5 or 6 years before you get a proper development of couch, because you cannot lay the wicket, lay the couch, and then have it going for 6 months and having football all over the top of it during the winter before the couch has got a chance to establish itself. And it will take a period before it's properly established.
Well, you're aware of the fact that the brickbats were thick and heavy. They said it was the ultimate act of sacrilege, and it was vandalism.
Yes, but it was also necessary, also very, very necessary.
And here we are at the end of 1987. What's the wicket like these days?
It's improving. It's still, I don't believe, a perfect wicket, but it is very, very much better. It's still a little bit too slow. I don't think it's got a heavy enough covering of couch to get the pace and the bounce out of it. But I remember that there were some rather traumatic occasions during the relaying. The VCA weren't very helpful. Ray Steele in particular came out and said, you have to lay the whole wicket in the 1 year. We were going to do it over 3 years. But he said, we'll take the matches away unless you already put on a hell of an act. But in actual fact, we couldn't do it all at once because we didn't have the black soil. That was the simple matter of the thing. You couldn't get sufficient black soil. And also we had the opportunity when we laid half of it, and Ted Ajani, one of the committeemen, he got us the supplies of black soil. We got half of it done. And from then on, of course, we were right, because we had the stuff that we'd taken out to use the following year. And we knew that was really good soil. So it should be really first class now.
Well, that was one great controversial issue. Another surely must have been the wrangle with the VFL about the destiny of the grand final.
Yes, I think that's right. It was Alan Aylett and Jack Hamilton were very keen to take it to Waverley, which was right and proper for them to do so if they so desired. It would have been foolish. I think it would have been absolutely stupid. I think Ron Reid, who was then sporting editor at the Herald, summed it up perfectly. He said, well, the grand final will no longer be grand if it goes to Waverley. And I think that's right, because there's no atmosphere in the place out there. It's built too far back and the noise gets away. But I believe the league were entitled to take it there if they wanted to be foolish enough to do so.
But your obligation, of course, was to the MCG membership, and you stated that firmly, but was it also your private opinion that it should remain here?
My private opinion was that it was advisable for it to remain here in the interest of football. This is my private opinion. In the interest of football, it was advisable for it to stay at the Melbourne ground. But I believe that if the league wanted to be foolish enough to take it out to Waverley, they should be able to do so.
Should the Victorian Premier have intervened?
No. I think that was a tragic mistake. But I've got to qualify that in another way and say that I believe when the league wanted to extend their ground out there to 130,000, I think the government was perfectly right